Shall we begin? Let's begin now.
This is not a drill.
Repeat, this is not a drill.
Is that all you got?
Let's begin now.
What up?
Craig Pasta Jardula. You'll recognize him from hosting the Jimmy Dore Show while Jimmy's on tour.
I always say, tell me one thing that Joe Biden has done better than Donald Trump. Tell me one freaking thing. Joe Biden's going to do the whole student debt thing. No, he's not. Student loan freeze is ending. Prepare to pay up starting August 30th. Joe Biden had a chance. He had leverage when he went to talk about the debt stealing. He didn't get it done with McCarthy. He couldn't get it done with McCarthy, but he still made sure there was a pipeline of money to go to Ukraine
Thank
war
God.
and any other war they want. But student loan forgiveness,
it was worth it because they're winning.
That was their crown jewel. Didn't get it done. How many people has Joe Biden been guilty of killing?
That's right.
Joe Biden was for every single war, including the Iraq war. He was a senator with the Democrats, and he's the one who brought it to the table for George W. Bush to have his illegal war. Maui fire victims faced evictions and cutoffs. Can you imagine this? The fact that they're sending all this money, they're arguing to send all this money to Ukraine, and they won't even help these people out. They don't have money to help the citizens who lost everything, but they have money to fund war. We're going to be here every Tuesday and Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern. And now remember, it's time for Pasta to Go.
Hello, welcome to Pasta to Go. I am your guest host today, CheeseSlice. Pasta is out running errands and taking care of things, but he has recorded several interviews this morning, and I'm here to share them with you today. But first, before we get onto those interviews, I would like to share this, something that we definitely need to keep in our hearts and minds. Shonda Masta is in her fight against cancer, and she still needs help reaching that goal to help pay for the treatment. My understanding is she recently went in to have chemotherapy treatments, and she's starting those now. We do think that she's got a fighting chance here, and she's going to win. So help her out and try to do whatever you can. Send her good messages on Twitter. She likes those as well. But definitely keep her in your hearts and minds, and let's help her out. And you got this, Shonda. We believe in you. And also, another recent news, we've got Jayme Lafredo news. Oh, man. I have this queued up, but somehow the website is all screwed up. So I can't use that. Anyway, Jayme Lafredo, we talked about him on Friday or on Thursday when I hosted the show. He was in detention he's been detained by Israel for the crime of doing journalism. He was released on Friday, but he's not allowed to leave the country. So he's being held on for a trial. They want to investigate his phone, and the police are trying to prove that he had something to do, something kind of tied to Iran. It's completely trumped up charges. And the thing is, he's done nothing that other journalists in the country haven't already been doing, and those people are not being held accountable. So if you follow this channel, you're probably fully aware of that story, but you could also still contact the State Department and tell them that they should release him, because he could be released from Israel like that with a phone call from the State Department saying, hey, you got to let this guy go. So they probably won't listen to us because our State Department does not care about journalism. They don't care about free speech and the First Amendment. But at least you should go on record trying to tell them that, hey, do your jobs and stand up for an American who's stranded overseas and being held by one of our allies for doing the crime of journalism. And just because he's working for the gray zone is no excuse why they shouldn't stand up for him. If he was with the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times, you could bet your house they would have already pulled him out of the country. But they didn't stand up for Gonzalo Lira. They're not standing up for Jayme Lafredo. The best you can do right now is call the State Department and let them know that they need to stand up for him and do their jobs as the State Department, protect American citizens abroad. All right. I'm sorry. I had an article for that, but I couldn't. The website wasn't working and I couldn't bring it up. Anyhow, we will move on to the meat of the show. You're here to watch Pasta. You're not here to see me because I'm just the engineer, the guy behind the scenes most of the time. So Pasta has 3 big interviews today. He's met with Daniel McAdams. He's met with Jayme Kuzmarov, who is our weekly contributor for the Left on Left segment that we do that goes on the radio. We'll be sharing that recording today. We've been recording those behind the scenes, but we also have video footage of most of them. So we're going to share that today. And then we're going to finish it off with a interview with Sam Husseini. And that one is the one I'm most looking forward to because Sam Husseini likes to get into those briefing rooms and cause trouble whenever he can by asking serious, legitimate questions. So let's get it started. We're going to go with Daniel McAdams right now. So Pasta, take it away. Oops. Man, I got to get better at that transition. Here we go. Now I'll go. Pasta, take it away.
Okay, welcome back to the show, everybody. Craig Pasta Jarduli here. This is Pasta to Go. Of course, the Homeless Left, the combination show. We like to do this and put this up whenever we can. We've been having some great guests, some great conversations, but we're not done. We have a lot more to discuss, so let's throw the bat signal out there. Bam! All right, some people are looking for a hero. I'm just looking for a journalist or a political commentator or just somebody who's got a lot of sense and can talk nuance about things going on in the world. And that's why our next guest is all of that and then a bag of chips. This guy is one of my favorite guys out there. Really, to tell you the truth, I love looking at his Twitter. But if there was no censorship, he'd probably have 10 times the following because he doesn't play team sports, at least not the traditional red team, blue team sports in which the ruling class is trying to keep us in, to keep us divided so they can hold on to power. A guy who pushes back against that, ladies and gentlemen, the Daniel McAdams. How you doing, brother?
Hey, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on your great program.
Oh man, I love talking to you. I've loved
Pasta,
talking to you for some time.
Let's talk some pasta later. I need some.
We've got to see each other out there. We got to see each other at the first Rage Against the War Machine. I saw you at the Libertarian Convention when you were there with obviously Dr. Paul. And it's interesting for me because that has been a whole kind of journey of sorts where I started out in the political mindset. Iraq war and 9/11 really kind of shaped and sculpted me. And for some reason, I found myself in the Democratic Party because I thought it was the party of anti-war, Mr. McAdams. But then eventually, as we've gone along in this whole bit of charades, I like to call it, because I think we've been fed nothing but a lot of propaganda, I found myself paying attention to a lot of I don't want to say libertarian views, but views of liberty, right? Like understanding how important our civil liberties are, our freedom of speech, our freedom of press, what the press is supposed to mean. My first question to you today, Mr. McAdams, is can you give us a report card on where we are with liberty today, especially after the last 4 years we've had of the Joe Biden administration that was following the Donald Trump administration and things like it feels like, and correct me if I'm wrong, that everything changed in 2016 after Obama. I mean, it was like Obama was a whole new thing, but then we had this whole nother level of like time of acceleration and craziness and like almost like some type of fuel being thrown on the fire to keep us divided. What's the Liberty report card on where we are today?
Oh, the question makes me feel suicidal. I mean, we should be doing it. We should be doing a lot better than we are. We should be able to transcend the red and blue mental prisons better than we have. I don't consider myself a libertarian, but I'm pro-liberty, like you. In that I don't trust the institutions anymore. And that's one of the reasons I haven't voted for a long time, because I think they're all rigged. But I do care about liberty and I care about people. So how is the libertarian movement? How is liberty done since Obama? Well, back when Obama became president, it was a wake-up call for me, because I was on Capitol Hill during the George W. Bush years working for Ron Paul, and we had great allies on the left, on the progressive left, and we did a heck of a lot of really cool things. We did a lot of like things behind the scenes, shared a lot of info with my colleagues on the progressive side to kind of try to stop the war machine that was, just walking behind George W. Bush, doing whatever his handlers wanted. And my wake-up call was when Obama came in and all of my friendships and contacts dried up, because he was going to be the peace candidate. And then he started joining Americas, and then he started more wars in the Middle East, on and on and on. And I said, hey guys, let's do some stuff. Let's see if we can get some press conferences together. And there was a loss of interest. Now that is not 100%. There were some who didn't toe the party line, but it was a wake up call for me, and it was very depressing. And then basically, then Trump came in, just kind of crapped over everything, right? And just became, so that's a long way of saying Liberty should be doing better right now. I would give it a D for how we're doing, for how well we've been able to harness all of the gems that have been given us that we can use to argue against the oppressive authoritarian state. And we haven't made that many inroads, I'm afraid to say.
That's now in like reality as far as laws that are there. What about a mindset from the people, right? Because there's a lot what you said you don't consider yourself a libertarian. And that was like the first time we had a conversation, I was like, what do you mean you don't consider yourself a libertarian? And now as I've taken this little journey through the Libertarian Party, I understand why you might not be a libertarian, because all parties have their luggage. And it seems like the Libertarian Party can't get out of their own way. I mean, I have a lot of respect for Angela McArdle. I think she's one of the best chairs, but I think she's made some crazy moves that have really been like, wait, what are you doing over here? You're almost like promoting Donald Trump because you don't have a candidate you're crazy about, but whose fault is that? And I'm trying to tie in a question saying, okay, why not a libertarian, right? Isn't third parties a way for us to look? Like, in other words, if we had the right leadership within the Libertarian Party, could that be a solution to what we're seeing?
Well, one of the paths that we've chosen with the Ron Paul Institute after Dr. Paul was out of Congress, and it's actually something he did the entire time that he was in Congress and before he was in Congress, is kind of the path that's more difficult, which is the path of education rather than political action. Now you can start an organization and have activists doing all sorts of activisty things and working on campaigns and elections, and you can raise a lot of money provided you stay in your mental cages and do that. It's a lot more difficult to say, hey guys, we're in it for the long run. We are going to do our best to try to educate society to a way that people will slowly start demanding better quality of politicians, no matter what party they're in. And that's difficult because you have to play the long game. And that's really, I mean, politicians are the trailing edge of any of the zeitgeist. When society changes, politicians will change to reflect that. And I think we're starting to say, hey, I don't want to be too optimistic because I'm a pessimist, but I think we're starting to see a little bit of that in the Republican Party, because you have some leading Republicans saying, well, this Ukraine war is terrible. You have sort of a thin anti-war vein going within the party. And of course, they don't get it philosophically because we need to go to war with China, or we need to support Israel, but they're starting to question this sort of old shibboleth that we're tough conservatives and we have to go to war everywhere. So that's a positive sign. If we could start convincing more people like that, then I think we can start seeing changes in the kinds of people we elect. And there are some bright spots out there.
Yep. See, I remember watching a video with you. It's a recent video. I think you did it 4 or 5 days ago with Dr. Paul. And you mentioned the fact that everybody's asleep at the wheel when it comes to the Congress. In other words, there's no pushback to what's going on in Israel, just the blank check, the funding, same thing with Ukraine, that at least several years ago, we would have a Dennis Kucinich or a Ron Paul on the floor going, yo, what's going on over here? In fact, I want to remind our audience that it was Dr. Paul who kind of told us a little secret of Hamas and how it was formed and created on the floor of Congress. Isn't that important, Mr. McAdams? Because the fact is that we have nobody doing that anymore, right? So even though we've kind of, I see this kind of transition to where people are trying to, groups like what you're doing over there with the Ron Paul Institute, trying to educate the masses on what's actually going on. Aren't we losing something by not having a libertarian vessel of sorts within the Congress? Because, I mean, I disagree with Congressman Massey on a lot of things, but by far and large, Daniel, he's my favorite congressman because at least he gets some conversations going on the floor that won't be had, like pointing out the fact that AIPAC has a representative for every single congressional member there and stuff like that. Aren't we losing something by kind of walking away from the potential activism within our congressional members from the Libertarian Party? I mean, isn't it essential is what I'm asking.
Yeah, and I feel terrible for Thomas Massey because he's standing out there alone, and it must be hard for him. It must be very hard. Now he has tactical allies like MTG and a few people like that, but they don't get the full picture, you know. And I don't want to be like this. The angry old guy yells at computer screen. But back when we were on the Hill, we did a lot of things to pull members together. You know, one of my main jobs behind the scenes was to get together this group we call the Thursday Luncheon Group, and they went to Dr. Paul's office, closed door, off the record, all Republicans who are starting to get skeptical about the war. This is in the early 2000s. When they got in there, they started being able to feel a little bit more comfortable to say what they really thought and to share thoughts, knowing that they wouldn't be shared with other people. And you started developing a kernel of kind of a Republican opposition to war, opposition to what was happening. And it became very important, and it started to show up in votes that we were having. So I don't know that we have that right now. I don't see it right now. And it's got to be hard for someone like Thomas Massey. I can only hope that there are, as much as I don't believe in electoral politics, that there are some young Republicans that will be elected this time that might be more open to challenging. I mean, one of the things that's great about Thomas Massey is that he is a successful person before he went to Congress. He's not on the grift. He's got 50 patents or something. He's a very accomplished scientist. So when he gets there, it's sort of like what the founders envisioned, someone who's not going there to make a buck, who's going there to represent, constituency. So it would be nice if we saw more people like that coming in.
You say you're a pessimistic. I think I'm a little bit more pessimistic than you. I've completely given up on the Democratic Party. I think they're, I should have listened to Harry Belafonte years ago when he said, I'm kind of dipping in here. I don't know if you remember it. Harry Belafonte was sitting with Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama, and he goes, I'm dipping in here to see if there is anything worth salvaging of this party. And the answer is no. There seems to be a little bit of listen, we get a little bit movement in the Republican Party. I feel that you have people like Marjorie Taylor Greene or people like Matt Gaetz that were against the Ukraine war because they were able to do with the Ukrainian war the same tactics. This is the Republicans against the Democrats, which the Democrats did against the Republicans for the Iraq war. They took the Iraq war in the beginning, and the protest was about anti-empire, anti-interventionist. This is what the United States, and they turned it into Bush's war.
Yeah.
So they were able to go back to that divide and conquer spot. I feel like when it comes to the Ukrainian war, we see the Republicans doing the same thing. They can make this Biden's war, so that's why they can push out against it. But hey, when it comes to Israel, everything's left on the table. In fact, I want to play a tweet. I want to just show a tweet real quick. I don't have to play it because I don't want people to read it at home. But this is something you retweeted, and I love your savagery. You're the one shooting them, dickhead. You said, and this is Netanyahu once again. And really, to tell you the truth, the key to this speech is, and I got to tell you, Daniel, I have a hard time listening to the whole speech when you get their tell in the beginning of the speech. When Netanyahu says at the beginning of this speech right here, and he says, I appeal to the UN General Secretary, your refusal to evacuate the UNIFIL soldiers has turned them into hostages of Hezbollah. He starts off this whole speech, Daniel, saying Iran's proxy forces. Okay, that's telling you right now, this has never been about Hamas. This has never been about Hezbollah. This has always been about greater Israel. This has always been about the Zionist project moving forward. You know what I'm saying? So you have Republicans that will buy all into this, yet they'll kind of push back a little bit when it comes to the Ukrainian war. Isn't that just really about playing pushing people against each other, saying this is Biden's war and we can be bad against it? They're really not anti-war is what I'm trying to say. Your thoughts there?
Yeah, you're right. And thanks a lot. You got me even more depressed.
I know. I'm sorry.
It feels like there's a kernel somewhere. But the Israel issue is a difficult issue because, first of all, money makes politics go around. And when you can write someone $100 million check, they get your attention. And that's just how it works, unfortunately, in the way our system is run. Then you have this sort of a lot of American Christians follow a path that's I frankly find disturbing. Hey, I don't care what your religion is, man. Do whatever you want. However, when your religion says I got to try to help God destroy the world, I got a problem with that. I don't like it very much. And it's terrible because those of us who have come to oppose this current secular state of Israel, and I never thought I would say that because I was always an Israel supporter, back in the 80s and 90s. But those of us who have come to oppose that, unfortunately, get tarred with this brush of being you just hate Jewish people. That's absolutely not the case. And in fact, there was a great piece on anti-war today. I wish I had it in front of me, antiwar.com, written by a Presbyterian minister, I think, talking about how Israel's biggest backers in America are actually driving it off the edge to the abyss, and that's where it's going. So people can't see that. People are, they're in their boxes, and also, I mean, look at all the right wingers on places like Twitter. They're all on the grift. If you say something outside of the view of the people who are funding your little right wing outfit, look at ask Candace Owens about that. See what right? Yeah. You used to have a big salary, and now you have no salary.
You're pointing out something very important here. We might as well get to that too as well. You did also have another tweet that says, "Don't have hate in your heart. Don't let your language," pretty much saying, let's not lump in all Jews with Zionists. And I think that's really important that you're doing that, Daniel, because a lot of people, they get very, I'm saying, I have a lot of truther friends in the truther community, and sometimes they're like, no, it's the same thing. We've seen certain people out there who've pushed back against the Zionist entity, but clouded the whole situation of Jews and Zionists as one. As someone who's gone in the streets and covered a lot of the protests, these protests out in the streets, and I've talked to a lot of non-Zionist Jews in these groups. Some being very religious, pro-Palestinian rabbis of sorts in the streets talking. Why do you think it's important to clarify the two between being just a Zionist and a Jew out there? Because I think that there is an attempt, and that also aids, I think, the Zionists, because then they can use that, they can weaponize that to say, hey, look what they're doing. They're being anti-Semitic for real. Your thoughts, Daniel?
Yeah, you have no argument. You just hate Jewish people. That's what it is. So that's a way to refute your argument. Well, why did you kill 40,000 civilians? Well, you just hate Jewish people. Well, that's not the point. That's not the issue. But one of the reasons that it bothers me is I still have those libertarian instincts, and I like to, as Dr. Paul always says, you have to view people as individuals, not as members of groups. And people self-identify in their own way with a lot of groups, but you can't view it that way. I mean, I'm sure you said you covered a lot of the protests. A lot of these are led by particularly progressive Jewish folks, and there's no question about it. So, and I get on my timeline when I spicy about Israel slaughtered another family or whatever, I'll get all of the anti-Semitic caricatures and everything. And why won't you name the real problem? And I just don't want to go down that path because I don't think it's not productive, it's not healthy, and it's just a dumb thing to do. But that doesn't mean we can't. I'm increasingly critical of what's happening because I'm frankly so pissed off. Every time I turn on, and it probably comes through in my tweets are probably too spicy, but every time I see like this little kid just had his mom and dad blown up, my heart goes out. I've got children, and it just makes me so mad. And then I know that my tax dollars are paying for it and my government is supporting it and underwriting it. And smoke comes out my ears.
I think that's important because I think both sides of the argument weaponize that to their advantage. And then we can't have a nuanced conversation about what's really going on. You can be an anti-Zionist and be against the bombing of what's going on, and that doesn't make you anti-Semitic. And I think that's why you're so effective with your conversations and your argument. Let me ask you another question. Obviously, you're not a libertarian, but you believe in liberty. I would consider myself, and I've been saying this, I've never been a registered libertarian. I went to the Libertarian Convention. It was my first libertarian convention ever. And I thought it was by far one of the best conventions I've ever been to. I've been to several Democratic conventions. I've been to a lot of conservative events when it comes to elections as an election integrity activist. But the conversations we had at the Libertarian Convention, the ideas that were thrown around, me calling myself a leftist libertarian, I was so surprised on how many libertarians that disagree with me came up and talked to me about my ideas of liberty. Why is it impossible from a libertarian or a conservative, small government-minded mindset that we can't have central planning? In other words, I say I'm a leftist libertarian where I want as much liberty, I want as much choices as possible. What capitalism is the marketing says it's to provide. But there's a lot of libertarians that don't like my view that central planning can work. Why can't we build infrastructure, freeways, highways, roads? Why can't we have some sort of central planning that could work? Why are libertarians or the liberty movement so against that sometimes?
Well, the core philosophy of libertarianism is the opposition of the use of force. And that's the absolutely sine qua non that has to be respected. And the problem with central planning, if it's central government planning, is that the use of force is not only implicit, but it's explicit. You will give me half of your money, or I will put you in jail. Or if you're someone like Erwin Schiff, we'll keep you in jail until you're dead because you oppose the government putting a gun to your head and stealing your money, and most of the time doing things that you don't want done with your money. Now, and this is something that someone like Nassim Taleb said in one of our conferences. I think it was 2018. He made a great point, and I'm going to really screw it up if I try to quote him. But he talked about how you can be an anarchist at the national level and a communist at the local level. Because if we had a voluntary society, so for example, okay, I'm a Roman Catholic, I'm a traditional Catholic. Okay, that's my personal religious preference. If you had a voluntary community of traditional Catholics, and we did something, for example, we wanted to bring back the guilds, right? Let's go back to the Middle Ages. We wanted to do something like that. We wanted to have alternative currencies. I'm going to pay you in beats, and you can pay me in whatever, that sort of thing. The first thing that would happen is the IRS would come knocking at your door. Then the ATF would Waco you, So my point is, you can have voluntary communism as long as everyone agrees. Listen, guys, we're going to put everything in a pot. We're going to have a council to vote on where it goes and how it goes. And if you don't like how it goes, you can voluntarily opt out. And we hope that we can attract more people. So it's not a binary thing. It's just about rejecting the use of force. And government, unfortunately, is all about force.
Yeah, it's funny because one of my friends who really got me involved or got me in the thinking of the mindset that anarchy is possible. The first rule you said, there's no monopoly on violence. That's the number one rule right there of anarchy. And really, to tell you the truth, the way it's I can't stand it when Donald Trump he goes, communist and anarchist are taking over this country. I'm like, they're the opposite things there, Donald. Really, to tell you the truth, it's like they're not the same. How do we achieve then building a high-speed rail system, right? If we have the the anarchists nationally, but the communism locally, how do we obtain something like a high-speed rail for the whole country and infrastructure that works? Because to me, it's just a situation saying, well, we have to find a way to play nicely in the sandbox. We're all humans and species on a planet that we share. How come we can't pull this off without making sure that the government doesn't get overreaching? I mean, aren't we the people, if we had a fair election system with the ability to hire the right people and fire the right people, can't we get this done?
Well, if we had a fair economic system, we would have a lot more money to get it done, if you think about it, because our current monetary system with the Fed, and that's an issue that goes from conservatives to progressives, who really think about why we're in the situation we are. I mean, the Fed controls the money supply. The Fed keeps the working class poor, keeps the middle class, keeps a boot on the neck of the middle class, and makes the rich richer. So there's no incentive, for things that would benefit society, in the current situation that we have. But if we had the other half of our money, and if the Fed wasn't monetizing debt by inflating the hell out of us, then we'd be a richer society, and a richer society might be willing and able to take on, bigger projects. There is no utopia out there. There's no perfect system. So I think that's the problem that a lot of people have with libertarianism. Well, how would you fix this? Well, I don't know. That might not be able to be fixed. But we can do something that might make it a little better. How can we help working people if we don't have higher taxes, and what have you? Well, you might actually help them by doing something that relieves inflation, that doesn't steal half their money to fight foreign wars, etc. So we're kind of trying to get closer to where we each have more freedom, but we're never going to get perfect society this side of heaven.
That's a very nuanced point of view too, and it's very gray. It's not black or white. How do we get people to think nuance-wise and understand that things are gray? I mean, the one thing, you don't do this as much as some of the other liberty-minded people that do it a lot, that just drive me crazy. And it's not that I'm a big pro-Stalinist or a Leninist or a Marxist. Like I said, I consider myself to be a leftist libertarian. I think about how my ideology affects what's going on today. It's a different world than it was years ago. But the issue I have sometimes, because I think that the anti-socialism movement that can come from some liberty-minded people, really, to tell you the truth, is it's almost like they're stuck to their ideology the same way you see these Che Guevara shirt wearing people who have no idea what's going on in these other countries. Like, I've been to Cuba twice, and I've talked to a lot of people. And I talked to a lot of young people that's like, we don't give a damn about the revolution that happened years ago. We want to eat. We want food. We want money and stuff. And you have these lot of people just kind of on the left, so just married to that ideology. I see the same thing sometimes with the liberty movement sometimes. And the thing that it bothers me about that, it's that I have this let's clean your own house mentality. Let's get our stuff straight first before we start pointing the finger at what happened at the old Soviet Union or in all these other governments that are just collective governments, which I think, too, from my travels, Daniel, are only formed to push back against the empire. In other words, in Nicaragua, it's not like they're Leninist Marxists that say, oh, we want to be socialist. No, they have a collective government because they have to fight back against the empire. And I don't mean to be critical about you when you do those things. And when you talk about like Stalin or whatnot, like I said, you don't do it as much as some other people who have to go out of their way. Like, if I have Scott Horton on the show, he'll go out of his way to bag on Stalin and stuff like that. How do we reach this kind of happy medium where it's not so divisive and we can say, hey, man, there are some good things in the socialism and communism, and there are some bad things. Same thing with capitalism. How do we find that happy medium ground of sorts?
Well, I think a couple of things are important. I mean, first of all, first of all, the most important thing that you said in your last question is the word travel. Most people don't travel, and most Americans, especially those who think they're experts on foreign policy, have never been anywhere. And so the fact that you don't, not you, but you, meaning they, don't travel, don't talk to other people, it ironically, and this is even more ironic among those who, as you say, will bag on the commies are everywhere. They've actually developed a universalist ideology that mirrors Soviet totalitarianism, the inevitability of history. And you know this very well, the Fukuyama view, this whole idea that the neocons have that the world ends. Liberal democracy, as defined by our elites, is the end of time, the end of history. Everybody wants it. They just might need our help to do it a little bit. The Iranians want to be exactly like us, and we'll bomb them to hell if that's what it takes for them to be like us. We'll jab Gaddafi in the rear with a knife if that's what it takes. By God, we got to crack a few eggs, and that's a problem. I mean, this problem is this sort of this instinct, and you can have it from your neighbor who wants to tell you what to do. You can have it for your government. This instinct that you want to use force to tell other people how they should live. And that's I think we sort of have to get rid of. And we definitely have to get rid of this ideology that mirrors the totalitarianism that you claim to be opposed to. That's what I would say to them, and they would tell me to F off or something.
Last question. My gut tells me that the ruling class wants to give us Donald Trump. We're going to be stuck with Donald Trump. Now, you've pointed out some things that, well, all right, there's a little movement here of being anti-war from some members of the Republican Party. But it seems if Donald Trump gets in, we have the situation with Iran that can escalate even further. I see Joe Biden's administration setting up the golf ball to tee it off for Donald Trump to get in there as far as aiding Israel to fight against Iran. We hear they're sending troops there right now. And when I say tee him up, people don't – I don't want people to forget that with Operation Warp Speed, Donald Trump teed off the Democrats to go crazy with the vaccine, the mandates, and everything that followed. I mean, Donald Trump had a role to play. Even in the Ukraine situation, Donald Trump provided weapons that Barack Obama didn't want to provide for Joe Biden to tee off the situation. How are you going to push back now when Donald Trump gets back in there? Because I watch the Liberty Report. I watch you and Dr. Paul. 90% of it is foreign policy, right? It's about foreign policy. And you've mentioned before, this Iran is a country that's never even attacked us, never even threatened us. In fact, our first CIA coup operation was in Iran. I think we owe Iran one, Daniel. But how are we going to push back and get the populace to realize? Because a lot of Donald Trump supporters are going around and repeating this nonsense that Iran tried to whack them. I mean, that's just mind-boggling. How are you going to move forward after the election if Donald Trump is elected and foreign policy issue-wise, it's all about the main crux of our foreign policy. I mean, obviously, we'll have Taiwan to deal with, but I think there's going to be a whole situation where sending troops there right now when it's going to be about Iran, Israel. How are you going to push back against that?
Yeah, it's funny how uncreative the neocons are. It's like Hollywood. We're going to do part 12, of a blockbuster from the 50s. You remember? I mean, it was 2002 when George W. Bush came out and said, "Saddam tried to kill my daddy." And that was like, "Oh shit, we better go after this guy, man." And now we're getting it. Donald Trump, Iran tried to kill me. And it's the same thing. I mean, it's the same mentality, and I guess it just works. We're all Charlie Brown. We keep kicking the football, I guess. But it's terrible. And as far as looking at the Kamala Biden folks versus Trump, let's talk food. Whenever I drive to DC for our conference, I stop in Chattanooga at a place called Champy's. It's the best fried chicken I've ever had in my life. And the other cool thing about it is they will serve you a 40-ounce can of beer. 40-ounce can of beer while you're waiting for your food. But the problem is the brands they have are not the best. So they'll have a Miller and they'll have a Miller Lite. Neither of those two, I like a double IPA, right? But I'm sitting here and I'm looking at Miller and I'm looking at Miller Lite and I'm saying, I love having a 40. I think it's so cool to sit here with a 40 and a big pile of chicken in front of me. Miller and Miller Lite. Well, I'll take the Miller. What the hell? At least they might have a little bit more flavor. So there's a possibility that Trump, maybe by accident, will do the right thing. And the one thing I do like about Trump is that he gets irritated with people. And I could never see Biden or Kamala or anyone around them getting irritated with Netanyahu. But I can imagine Trump, for probably all the wrong reasons, calling up Bibi and saying, "Bibi, I'm sick of this. My numbers are going down. You got to stop this crap right now." And it's not like he cares about Palestinians or whatever, what have you. But, so there's a chance that he might do. And that's not a lot to cling to, but, it's a little bit.
But it's where we're at in 2024. Ladies and gentlemen, Daniel McAdams, thank you so much for joining the show today. Daniel, I look forward to seeing you again soon, whether it be DC or getting some fried chicken at Chappie's with a 40. I'm going to skip the 40. I'm going to get the double IPA because I'm an IPA guy. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you.
There we go. That was Pasta with Daniel McAdams, and I hope you enjoyed that interview. Up next, we're going to go into our Left on Left segment with Jayme Kuzmarov. We do this every week, and what we're going to see here is two segments where we record them for about 24 minutes and then chop them so we can put them out for the radio. And let's go ahead and jump in. Well, before we go into that, I wanted to share this. I always forget to do this. So here's Daniel McAdams' Twitter account. Go to that Twitter account, follow him, and do all the Twitter things. You know what you're doing when you get on Twitter. You know how to use it. But it's Daniel L. McAdams. There's a lot of Daniel McAdams on Twitter, but this is the one you want to follow. All right. Now, before I move forward, I just want to bring up Jayme. Here we go. It's Jayme Kuzmarov. He's a good guy. He teaches out in Oklahoma. And, well, you know the drill. Here comes Pasta. He's going to set everything up for you. And we got two segments with Jayme Kuzmarov. Here we go.
To the show. Let's get the bat signal out there. Bam! We're calling them. It's like, they have in Gotham, they have the Batman thing. We have this over here. When we want to get a great interview or we want to get a story, we put it out there. Let's see who we get today. Of course. Welcome, everybody, back to LOL, where the left critiques itself and laughs out loud. Keep itself from crying. I am your host, Craig Pastador. Along with me, of course, is my co-host, the professor, Jayme Kuzmarov. How you doing today, buddy?
I'm doing great, thanks.
So today we're going to have a serious conversation, right? We're going to have to talk a little bit about media, the media landscape, right? Right now, I would question what that word media even means now, Professor, because there are people who are claiming to be media, or I would say the average United States citizen, the way he consumes media and what he or she might consider media to be. There's a lot to break down, especially when we're talking about some of our traditional media, which you want to bring to the table, Professor. Go right ahead.
Well, I had in mind I've been a subscriber to the Nation magazine for many years, and it's a standard bearer of American liberalism. And in the past, they continue to produce some good investigative reporting, and they've had in the past some great columnists, such as Alexander Coburn, who's really a witty guy and a great guy who wrote for them. But the quality really had deteriorated at the Nation, like other magazines, like Mother Joan. So-called alternative media has just become like mainstream media. They censor certain topics. They attack people with a critical viewpoint as conspiracy theorists. And this issue, they're just like cheerleaders for the Democratic Party. And the October issue was particularly offensive. And the lead editorial, is for Kamala Harris. And they say something like, Harris is great in her own right. It's not just about voting for the lesser evil. She's a great and, the most progressive candidate in 50 years, which is a bunch of BS. And they actually quote Bernie Sanders in the article, who says, oh, well, her backtracking on Medicare and a ban on fracking is pragmatic. So, I mean, they kind of admit that she's backtracking on liberal issues and that she's not the most progressive, but they're saying, oh, that's pragmatic. And then they have another op-ed called Vaccines Work. And that's just a lie. We have more and more studies coming out that they don't work. In fact, very reputable universities have conducted studies that found more people died of COVID who got the vaccine than didn't get the vaccine. And we know so many people have been getting COVID who took the vaccine, and we know about all the side effects. So this is just a lie. So they're shilling for big pharma now, and the Nation was founded to oppose corporate power and corporate interests, and they've really fallen off the wagon. But it seems to be characteristic of the left media landscape, is just like the mainstream media.
Yeah, I mean, listen, let's talk about this in context with Kamala Harris, because I don't even think it's okay for me to ask the question of, like, are they accurate when they're talking about Kamala Harris? I mean, we've been following politics for quite some time. I would say, Professor, that the bar has been lowered. That, first off, I'm surprised that there's not something about saying that the elections are clean and transparent and as fair as could be. People still have a lot of questions about elections, and as an election integrity activist, I can tell you there were a lot of things to make you scratch your head about the previous election. Okay, let's put that aside. Wouldn't you say the bar is kind of lowered, that the ruling class is going to give us whoever they want? Really, the people don't have a lot of say. I mean, the fact that we have Kamala Harris, who's been protected, she can't literally, go into an open room with just random questions because she'll fall over her face. I mean, you could say what you want about Donald Trump. He's sticking to the script. And I think the fact is that he's playing to a very close-minded base that really thinks that immigration is the big problem and communism are the real big problem. But Kamala Harris, I mean, I don't know what she's sticking to. And I just don't know how we've ended up at a point where the bar is set so low for the people they're putting forth in front of us. I think a lot about Mockingbird Media, where the CIA has said that they're going to plant, either assets within every single bit of media. Have they completely co-opted it and controlled it right now? I mean, is that why we're getting such bad candidates like Kamala Harris?
Well, it looks to be that way. I mean, the Nation seems to have totally lost its independence and journalistic objectivity. And I've said on the show before, I mean, if you want to make, people might agree or disagree with the lesser evil argument, but you can make a case, well, Trump is so bad, and on certain policy issues, Democrat may be better. But to make what they're claiming, that Harris is the most progressive candidate in 50 years, when actually their own editorial admits that she's backtracked on core progressive issues, that's highly problematic. And they're making claims in here like they build Tim Walz as this great progressive, and they leave out all the wars that he supported, and that he supported a snitch line. I mean, even whatever your view on the COVID-19, what kind of guy but an authoritarian favors a snitch line for not wearing a mask or having family gatherings? And this is a guy who supports censorship, and they don't seem to be troubled by that. And they call him this great progressive in this op-ed. So that's a very disturbingly low bar of journalism for a
It's
magazine.
a low bar
that has
too,
a
as
good
well,
reputation.
Professor. I don't mean to cut you off, but it's also a low bar for what a progressive actually is. I think that
Yeah.
that co-option of not just the Democratic Party. Like I remember there was a time when a bunch of burners wanted to get in there and change the party from within the inside because they believed in the marketing. They believe if you had the voices, the votes, that you could actually create real change from within. And that's at a point where the left was, us as leftists, I would say, kind of said, okay, we understand why we're leftists, which we'll get to that in a second. But it seems like there's been a complete co-option of the word progressive and who the progressives are. And now this media that's coming out when they can say that Kamala Harris and Tim Walsh are the most progressive, when all the progressives knew them to be nothing more than establishment, but now they're the progressives within the party. I would say that their whole operation is complete, media and party-wise, right now in 2024. Looking forward, could you agree on that too as well?
Yeah, this magazine, and we find almost no magazines or newspaper that are independent. They're just shills for the Democratic Party, and they just basically promote party propaganda. And I don't want to read that. I want independent journalism, and I can decide for myself. I might ultimately decide on a lesser evil in various elections, but I want a journalist to give me all the facts, the good and bad. If there are some good about Waltz, but I also want to hear the bad, so I know and I can make an objective judgment and be realistic about who these candidates are. And look, as you said, we have an increasingly money-saturated system, and they've closed the primary. In this case, there was no primary. Harris, and when she ran in 2020 in the primary, she got 1% of the vote. So clearly she was not a very popular candidate. And she had a very shady background going back to her time as prosecutor.
Oh, yeah.
I was looking into the RFK case, and she refused to hear out, to expose clemency for Sirhan. She said, "Oh, he's guilty," when all the evidence point to him being set up as a patsy, and RFK is trying to get him released. And a lot of witnesses say it's impossible that Sirhan could have been the assassin of RFK. Yet when she was the attorney general, she made sure he stayed in prison. So that's a red flag right there, that she's supporting the deep state and that she's corrupt. And there are other corrupt things that have been exposed when she was a prosecutor at the beginning of her career. And then you can go forward in the Senate as vice president. I mean, she supported all the horrible foreign policies in Ukraine. She's a gung-ho hawk on Ukraine that's leading us into nuclear war, that's led to our taxpayer dollar going to support for fascist neo-Nazis.
Well, Professor, that's the Democratic talking line. They're all on the same page. And how dare you suggest that these news outlets, which they're supposed to be the fourth estate, provide us with the truth so we can have some independent thinking and think on our own. The left movement, the leftist movement, and it's not even left, right? It's like this tribe mentality of just going along, team sports mentality. I mean, the right is guilty of that too. I think they have to look at certain situations and a team mentality, and we're stuck in that kind of like paradox. But let's break this down a little bit. I mentioned Mockingbird News. We talked about, we're talking right here about The Nation. You have this article, you just went into it. It's all propaganda. It's all establishment talking points. You have the left and the right, but you have establishment talking points on both sides. That pretty much consumes our mainstream media. And then we have this mass censorship of independent journalists out there, right? Trying to go out there and just pick up stories. I mean, we're doing it on a nickel and a dime, where they're just grabbing a few bucks, going to one country, doing that one story and coming back, and you have multiple people doing these things, but we have mass censorship. What is the ruling class trying to do? What are they so scared about? What are they so scared about when it comes to independent journalists out there? And why do they prop up these other outlets so much? Is it really not about news anymore and just more about controlling the narrative? Your thoughts, Professor?
Well, my thoughts would be two things. One is divide and conquer. Yeah, the media has become so hyper partisan because it's a strategy of divide and conquer. They don't want working and middle class people uniting together along class lines. to develop a real progressive movement and to push for the redistribution of wealth and power in the country. So they want to balkanize and tribalize us. And every Republican has to be evil on one side, and every Democrat has to be evil on the other side. And I, as an independent writer, like I had an article about Oklahoma politics where I live, and the hero of the story is a Republican because he's fighting corruption in the state. But these liberal outlets won't take it because he's a Republican. You know, maybe if he has to be the bad guy. And the other is just pure. They want to limit the debate largely to culture war issues, to issues of race and identity, and they don't want a systemic critique of foreign policy and to expose, because once you delve into some of these conflicts like Ukraine, Israel, Gaza, you're dealing with major state crimes and atrocities, and they don't want that brought up. So.
Yeah. But you know what? Listen, Donald Trump is trying his best to make it so that the Democrats can say they are the lesser of two evils, right? I mean, at the end of the day, in the forefront, all your establishment Democrats will act like it's just status quo time, business as usual, let's go. But as you get down to the other members of the Democratic Party who have to speak to the constituents and the voters, they kind of tell you this, okay, we understand. We didn't really want Kamala Harris, but we're mitigating damage over here, right? You know, this is the lesser of two evil argument. And like I said, Donald Trump is trying his hardest with his xenophobic behavior to give them that weapon of sorts to kind of make that claim. But I remember Harry Belafonte, professor, talking about, I've kind of dipped my eyes in here to see if there's anything left or worth fighting for of the Democratic Party. I would say at this point, no. I mean, isn't the Democratic Party just completely useless at this point? I mean, even I suspect you could break it down. This Nation magazine right here, this article right here, these articles and this episode right here, you can break this down like blindfolded. It's so easy to see the propaganda. I'm suspecting that there's a lot of other people out there can also see it too as well, where they're going, nah, all right, you're just pulling my chain too much. You're not giving me what you asked for earlier, professor, which is honesty and the truth, what the real media is supposed to stand for. Would you say right now that the Democratic Party is pulled out every single last stop and they are just completely done at this point? In other words, after this election, there's no use of ever trying to make any good or scrap any pieces up from the Democratic Party. Your thoughts?
Well, one thought, in some way they are successful, because if you talk to a lot of people, especially they seem to reach, like a magazine like The Nation is read by a more well-educated crowd, I would say, and they reach those people. And if you talk to those people, they'll repeat all those talking points, and they'll consider somebody like RFK Jr. a conspiracy theory or a lunatic. And if you present certain arguments, whether it's about 9/11 or COVID, they'll call you out. And even people they'll attack you, sometimes very viciously, and they'll excommunicate you. So in a way, it does work, and they whip up hatred against the Republicans. If you talk to a lot of liberal Democrats, I think they've abandoned their liberal principles to create a better society. I mean, people consider themselves liberal to support a more humane government that would try and regulate big business and establish welfare for the poor and spend less money on military. But now when you talk to these liberal Democrats, they'll just go on and on about how evil Trump is, and they'll attack any Trump supporter as a racist. And I don't think they want to help those people in any way or develop a better society anymore.
Well, Professor, wouldn't you say that that's starting to have a lot of cracks in the dam? Because we see a lot more people, especially like the numbers that I hear a lot of Republicans endorse up is like blacks for Trump. They want to show groups that normally would always get in line with the Democratic Party now moving away and going to vote for Donald Trump. I think that's sad, because I think they should go to an independent space, right? Like, you know, when we left the Democratic Party, we weren't walking into the Republican Party. They were neocons, and they were just, they were nuts. They were crazy. They were, they have their own culture war BS stuff that they're, that they have. But the Democrats, it seems like they are losing a few people here and there. And also, too, Professor, while we are talking about the vaccine part about this, it's tough to get people to look at 9/11 and believe that there's something more than just a hijacking that took place. There's a deeper, darker, sinister plot. That's tough. But with vaccines, they make it seem easy. Vaccines work. They still have the commercials. They have big pharma controlling the TV. Hey, professor, you can get your vaccine for COVID-19 and the flu all in one. You can bundle it just like you bundle your progressive insurance. And back to the football game, and Taco Bell delivers to your house. Isn't there something to be said about the whole vaccine situation where they're still being stern on it? They're still saying get your vaccines regardless of any information out there. Why are they able to push that button left and right? And there are some candidates like Jill Stein who are deathly afraid to talk about this because she has a lot of her base that is all for vaccines. What is it with vaccines that they can push the narrative regardless? I mean, when you just talk about vaccines on the surface, we understand it's that I wasn't good in health, professor, but I understood that natural immunity was always better than induced fake immunity of sorts, right? How can they keep pushing this button?
Well, that's an excellent question. I don't have all the answers, but I mean, yeah, it's been a very effective psychological warfare campaign. It's been a military grade, and there's a good book by David Hughes about that, arguing and showing that this is a military grade psychological warfare campaign, and it may have targeted liberals and more educated audiences, and they lampoon anyone who criticizes the vaccine as against science. And they link it with some, like the people who believe climate change is a hoax and that this is supposedly this right-wing movement against science. So I think that's a very effective technique on propaganda. The traditional propaganda is to label, and Psy-War, when it comes to selling military intervention, is to label pacifists as traitors. So they've kind of played off that to label anyone skeptical of the vaccine as like either right-wing extremists or don't believe in science, and that taps into something very deep. This belief, particularly among educated people in the in scientific progress and in the value of science and in the backwardness allegedly of some of these conservatives. So I think they've pulled that off effectively. And the most gung-ho supporters of the vaccine, who are totally irrational, are often your traditional lefties. And some of it is they're older people. They're genuinely scared about COVID. But I guess they were brought up with vaccines as this kind of miracle cure for things like polio and other ailments when they were kids. If they grew up in the 50s, because a lot of these are older lefty types. And they're scared, and they just grew up with vaccines as something great, and they can't, even though they know the government lies to them, for some reason they distance all the lies about the wars in this area, and they still believe doctors. I think some of it was like Anthony Fauci. They still believe in the integrity of the medical profession. Maybe politicians have lost their integrity, or military people, but these are doctors. The doctors don't lie to you. And they believe Fauci is a great man. And so how could RFK? They think RFK is the crank because he criticized Fauci.
Yeah. Well, we said this, no independent thought, no independent thinking, professor. You have to have tribe mentality. It's on the left and the right now. And I think you hit it on the nose. Psychologically, this is about making sure that we keep us in a divide and conquer status quo, right? It's always about blaming your neighbor, not blaming the ruling class, blaming people for their thoughts and their belief, not blaming those who put you in these paradigms of sorts or these systems. The arguments are no longer allowed to be nuanced, right? That's another thing. That's one of the problems. If the argument has to be on top. We never have serious discussions about climate change, green, green energy, that sort of thing, because it seems like there's a plot by a ruling class to move everything into, things that they control, CBDCs, QR codes. Gas stoves are no longer allowed because they have to have an electric stove where somebody can flick the switch. They want every single type of, control and conversation out there. They want to control every single conversation. Isn't there something to be said about climate change that we don't have that discussion too as well? I want to point this out in specific because right now we're dealing, a lot of people are, there was hurricanes out there. And there's been talks about geoengineering, and geoengineering now they've admitted that it's out there. I mean, Brennan talked about it at the Council of Foreign Relations. Biden signed an executive order for cloud seeding. Isn't there something about the bigger picture that they don't let us have nuanced conversations right now? The establishment on the left and the right, and the Democratic Party is, I mean, you look at that Nation magazine, people will read the headline, vaccines work, and they'll move on. No serious conversations. We got about 3 minutes and change. Go ahead, Professor.
Well, there's a lot, yeah. And that vaccine article, it's actually the argument. He doesn't make an effective argument for his thesis that vaccines work, and he omits so much evidence and information, even the information.
But Professor, if you don't think this way, if you don't believe in us, then you're a Nazi, you're a homophobe, you're a misogynist. Please continue.
And climate change, we'll have to do a separate show for that, because I agree with you that there are a lot of nuances on that issue, but they want to make it just black and white and complexities on that issue. And there are divergences among scientists, but they label any scientist who's skeptical of the dominant narrative as in the pay of the fossil fuel industry, which is not entirely true. And I think the left environmental movement uses alarmism, and sometimes activists, I mean, they have a good intention and heart, but they have a crusade that they're on, and so they also shut out any information that contradicts their view. And this is not like a war. A war is often black and white. A war is either a war of self-defense or aggression. You're either for or against it. But climate change is more complex and the broader environmental strategies that we need. But they have the same mentality, and the enemy, in this case, it's fossil fuel industry, the enemy, and they claim climate change is a hoax. So it must, anybody who raises any skepticism about any of the official narrative must be in the pay of the fossil fuel and is the enemy. And they use alarmism. The environmental movement has used that strategy. They think if people are scared to death that the world's about to end, that they'll act. Otherwise, they won't act. They're too comfortable. So they use the same technique.
And that kills the whole conversation. That kills the goal of getting people to look at things. The way they also kind of staple like certain theories or thoughts. Like I said something the other day, well, if we're going to talk about climate change, because this is a post, once again, Jill Stein made, pretty much blaming the hurricanes on climate change on both the Republicans and Democrats. And I'm like, it bothers me that some of the leftists will just immediately blame climate change, but won't factor in geoengineering to the conversation. And they're like, oh, what are you, some just crazy right-winger that thinks that the United States government can control, the hurricanes with a remote control? I'm like, no. I'm saying that they've been trying to do so for quite some time. We know for a fact they've been spraying aluminum and all these things in the air. We know that they've been doing cloud seeding to get it rain in certain areas. We should understand and know exactly what they're doing to see what effect it does have. I'm not calling for one side or the other. I'm calling on for transparency. Last 30 seconds, Professor. Go get it.
Yeah, and if I could add, because I've been in touch with Theodore Postal, who's an independent MIT scientist, and he has a theory, and he draws on some leading experts in this field, that climate change has to do in part with fossil fuel, but also a lot to do with the sun and rotations of the sun. So it's not exactly as some of these climate change, I guess, hawks like Bill McKibben say. He's critical. But, there's a lot of nuance.
That's all the time we got.
Complexity.
LOL. We'll see you soon.
We'll have to do a whole show on that one.
30 seconds, I told you.
Okay. It's too hard to unpack in a short time. It's a big, complex
When
topic.
I said 30 seconds, final thoughts. 30 seconds. We just got to watch out what the nation's doing now and all the other leftist outlets. We don't have real journalism anymore. So we encourage you to go to my Substack, read into it. There's a lot of other people out there like me who want to tell the truth. Boom. Something like that. It's okay. We got it good. Let's get into the next one. I'm going to take it down. Okay. We'll get right into it. So that was such a great episode because it was like,
definitely.
I mean, we were just nuanced.
We covered a lot.
Stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll do a whole one on climate change because that's a big topic. Oh, yeah. There's a lot to unpack. Yeah.
Okay. Let me get this stuff up. Hold on. All right. This one you're going to do a lot of talking on.
Okay.
Here we go and begin. Welcome to LOL, where the left critiques itself and then laughs out loud to keep itself from crying. I am your host, Craig Pasta Jaradula, and of course, with me today is my co-host, Jeremy Kuzmarov, the professor himself. He is a professor, of course, at Tulsa Community College, and he's the author of many cool articles and books. He's got a great Substack, and his newest book, Warmonger by the Clintons, is something special. Professor, how you doing today?
I'm doing great. Great to be with you.
Professor, if you ask a lot of conservatives out there nowadays who their number one enemy is, right? They'll say probably Klaus Schwab, George Soros, Bill Gates. But some of the independent thinkers out there, they also too who don't like a lot of conservative leaders and leftist liberal leaders nowadays because they really aren't left. They really aren't liberal. They're just kind of part of this whole globalist oligarchy of sorts, or at least just, fighting for power and pretending to be the left. A lot of times you'll hear the name Justin Trudeau come up. Professor, I believe you got a lot to say about this particular guy. And more importantly, why is it important that everybody on all political sides of the spectrum pay attention to Justin Trudeau? And also, right off the bat, you can answer, is he the bastard son of Fidel Castro? Your thoughts?
Okay, well, I mean, I think the themes we're discussing on our show, the weakness and moral bankruptcy of what passes for the political left in the United States, is part of a broader phenomenon across Western Europe as well as in Canada, where we see this rightward shift in society, growing power to corporations, war industry. We see Canada and European countries just blindly align with the U.S. empire, often to the detriment of their own society. And Justin Trudeau, I think, reflects a broader decline of American liberalism in North America. I mean, he's really adopted very conservative policies, and it should be said that, and authoritarian policies. It should be said that, his father was Pierre Elliott Trudeau, who was the Canadian Prime Minister in the 1960s and 70s and into the 80s. He served various terms. And Pierre Elliott was really very interesting. And in many ways, I mean, he had a mixed record like other leaders. He came down very hard and oppressively on the separatist movement in Quebec and the uprising. On the other hand, he did help to integrate Quebec into Canada after there was kind of rebellion in the 1960s. But he was very nationalistic. He tried to assert more Canadian control over its natural resources like oil and prohibit U.S. corporations from operating in Canada. He allowed haven for draft dodgers in the Vietnam War. He was not supporting the Vietnam War. He didn't blindly ally Canada with U.S. foreign policy. He was sympathetic to socialist governments like Cuba and Castro. He had a very good relationship with Fidel Castro. And he had, I think, pushed for good relation with communist China. He had more socialist domestic policies as far as championing the Medicare system in Canada and higher tax, progressive income tax, higher tax on the wealthy, better funding for education. We kept the cost of education low. So compare him and an independent, moving Canada toward an independent foreign policy, and he was critical of Lester Pearson, his predecessor, who had really championed NATO. Compare him with his son, Justin Trudeau, who's just aligned Canada with the United States. He allowed U.S. corporations to take over their economy, who adopted neoliberal economic program, budget cuts, and who's aligned Canada with U.S. foreign policy. And he provided $8 billion or more to Ukraine. And he's photoed, hugging Zelensky, and he brought even a neo-Nazi to the an actual Nazi spoke in the Canadian Parliament. And he's just, there's another photo of him hugging Netanyahu. He's funded Israel to the hilt. He supported, U.S. regime change operation like in Venezuela and Haiti. And he cracked down during the COVID. He's really so tight with Big Pharma. And Canada had far more draconian policy than in the United States as far as the COVID lockdown. Like, they were on lockdown for much longer than anywhere in the United States. Kids were out of school for a long time. They even had curfews, and it was a police state. And then the truckers revolted, and a court has now found them that he was there was no basis for him declaring a national emergency. He froze their bank accounts, and some were jailed. So he really took on the action of a dictator.
Let's break this down for a second. You're right. Even in some parts, when it came to COVID, he required you to get on the digital system. In other words, grandmas and aunties who came back, who really weren't good at working the phone and the apps, but had their paperwork that they got their jabby jab like a good little soldier. They weren't even allowed to come back into the country. They were holding them at the airport until they signed up to the digital passport system. And when you talk about digital passports, you get really scary. But my question to you is this, Professor. Okay. Justin Trudeau, and this is, by the way, this is your article here in Covert Magazine. Ladies and gentlemen, go check out Covert Magazine. Professor, this is your article here. It says, hiding behind a mask of genteel humanism, Canada's Prime Minister sells out his people to corporate interest and early participants in U.S. imperialistic wars around the globe, which you can obviously say that, yeah, he goes along with it, which whatever war the United States is, he's there, he's right there. But what I'm asking you, Professor, isn't there something more about just Justin Trudeau being a, I don't want to say Manchurian candidate, but like a sheep herder, secret sheep herder of getting people back into the establishment, into the two-party duopoly, into the divide and conquer mentality, because he can just virtue signal to a base that kind of isn't getting involved enough or understanding or learning enough to understand that they are being duped into the two-party duopoly. I mean, what I'm trying to say is, doesn't the voter or the supporter of Justin Trudeau and all the liberal left, you know what, libs here in America, isn't a lot have to go on the shoulders of the people for not being so nuanced and just being surface level thinkers?
Well, that is a problem. I mean, as far as foreign policy issues, as we discussed on this show, the media really doesn't cover those issues at all in a nuanced way. They often portray like war like Ukraine in a caricatured way, and the public is, and there's a lot of Russophobia, so the public is grossly ill-informed. So he hadn't faced a lot of backlash on that issue. He's very tightly allied with mining interests. Canada has big mining industry, and I think one reason they've adopted a more aggressive foreign policy and aligned more with the United States in the last generation is because Canadian mining interests and companies have been very aggressive in plundering developing world countries. And so Trudeau has supported U.S. efforts to overthrow socialist governments like in Venezuela and South America, and support right-wing governments around the world. And yeah, he tried to create a cult of personality, but I think it's failed because now his popularity rating are very low, and there's going to be an election in 2025. And the conservative, there's a Trump-type candidate who attacks immigrants and pushing for more stringent immigration measures and kind of scapegoats immigrants and minorities for Canadian problems, Pierre Poilievre. And at this point, he's the favorite to win the next election. So it shows that, like what you're saying, the Democrats have lost a lot of supporters here in the United States, and the Liberal Party in Canada has lost a lot of supporters. In a recent by-election, I believe they lost a key riding that was in Toronto or Montreal. That was a mainstay of their party for a decade. They lost in some by-election. It was a sign of slipping support because their policies are not benefiting average people. The cost of living is growing up, just like here in the United States, and they're not addressing it, and they're spending taxpayer dollar on these fruitless foreign policy interventions, and they're supporting more and more authoritarian measures, and they've crossed a tipping point, as you said, like here in the United States. But unfortunately, there's no viable left movement for them to join, so they're gravitating to the reactionary conservatives who blame immigrants for all the problems and would adopt ever more right-wing policies that will make life harder for the middle and working class people if they get in.
Isn't there something to be said, the fact that it's always the same type of oppositional candidate that's coming across from a Justin Trudeau or a leftist like an Obama? It's this Donald Trump style candidate who goes after immigrants, right? And like, the fact is, it's just, how myopic is it that most people blame immigrants when they don't look at the foreign policy decisions from the Western nations that have led right to this mass migration, and you get this kind of like angry people are mad at another human being for coming here or trying to make a better life for themselves. And like I said, it's so myopic because they don't look at the reasons why they're coming here. It almost is as if that whoever's controlling things, Professor, is making sure that they have two different types of candidates that are so, I don't know, team sports like mentality against each other, and then the people follow rather than going and having a bunch of independent thoughts and thinkers that can really come up with some great solutions to lead not only these countries but the planet in a more positive way in the future. I mean, is there something to be said that we always have these type of two characters? What's the candidate's name who's coming up to run against Justin Trudeau again?
His name is Pierre Poilievre. Now, Canada does have the NDP, which is a social democratic party, but they've also they've a very weak party as far as, I mean, they are strong in supporting things like unions, and on some domestic issues, they are strong in supporting a left-wing position. But on foreign policy, they've been among the most hawkish, like on the Ukraine war, just like the Green Party in Germany and Europe. And Canada's military budget from Stephen Harper, who preceded Trudeau, who's a conservative, the military budget has expanded dramatically in Canada over the last 20 years under Harper and then Trudeau, and NDP is not pushing back on that. So they're not real leftists, and they're not offering a socialist solution. It's just kind of more, somewhat more social democratic, where the liberal is more neoliberal. But I think the broader question you ask, you have to look at the history and legacy of McCarthyism. There were vibrant left-wing movements in the United States and Canada during the 19-teens, 20s, Great Depression, 1940s. But then you had the phenomenon of McCarthyism, and it just decimated the left-wing movements. They were attacked.
I just don't know what it's going to take for people. I just don't know what it's going to take for people, the populist, to just get ahead and just say, get up and say, enough is enough of this stuff. I mean, look at Trudeau. He's following his father, right? We had a similar situation with the Cuomos in New York. I mean, we have this all the time. These legacies, these dynasties, they can only, I mean, that's not elections. Those are selections. They're selecting bloodlines and family members to make sure that they run with, the globalists or the establishment or whoever's making the calls, running with that ball over there. Who is Chrystia Freeland, and what influence does she have on Canadian foreign policy? Speaking of the chosen ones by the establishment to make sure a certain goal is fulfilled. Go ahead, buddy.
Yeah, well, Freeland was very influential in pushing this hawkish Ukraine policy. She was a foreign minister, and now she's serving as a finance minister. And she had the right pedigree. She's a graduate of Harvard. Now, her grandfather was actually a Nazi propagandist in Ukraine, and her family is connected with the Ukrainian far-right neo-Nazi anti-Russia movement in Ukraine. And she's pushed, again, this hardline anti-Russia policy in Trudeau's government. And it's people like her, that always seem to get ahead. These Harvard-trained people who hate Russia and support hawkish foreign policies and neoliberal economic policy.
Don't leave the Yale monsters out of there. There's a lot of Yale's churning out a lot of, establishment-friendly people. So, obviously, my question would be is how much of a police state has Trudeau turned Canada into? And what's the technique or the tactic he uses to do so? Is it like we have to protect you more? We have to protect you. I know censorship is sold in the United States is that we can't let misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation get out there because it could actually be harmful. How is that were applied in Canada with Trudeau, making Canada more of a police state? Your thoughts, Professor?
Well, I think there are a lot of parallels with the United States. There's similar kind of rhetoric and arguments made by Trudeau and his supporters to support censorship. And he really allied himself very closely with Big Pharma, that his own wife, allegedly, that was the reason she divorced him, because she couldn't take how he had prostituted himself to Big Pharma. And the trucker was really a disgrace how that was handled. and that had the sign.
How did the courts handle that, by the way?
What's that?
How did the courts handle Trudeau's
Well, there was a court
invoking of
investigation, and
emergency
they
powers?
found that he exceeded his mandate and that he was wrong to declare an emergency. There was no basis for an emergency. That was a peaceful protest. You have a right to protest in Canada, whether you agree or not with the truckers and their position on the vaccine mandates and the lockdowns. They have that right. There was no violence. He had no basis for declaring a national emergency and legally going after leaders of that movement. And many supported them because they felt the lockdown went too far. And those lockdowns had terrible impact, like on youth. A lot of youth were kept out of school for a long time. And like there's articles coming out now, how even now, 3 years later, the test scores are way down. Those kids lost out. And a lot of poor income, the richer home, they could homeschool their kid. The parent maybe was around, or they could hire a tutor, not in the poorer homes. And some kid never even went back to school. And a lot of the kids became depressed. They couldn't do the activities they loved. They couldn't even see their friends. And I had that with my own kids. So, and it was much worse in Canada because they kept the lockdown longer. They even imposed curfews, and they went crazy over the COVID. And apparently they're still drumming up fears about new waves of COVID and promoting these vaccines that don't work. We know that people who take the vaccines get COVID.
Professor, a populist right person, a Trump person, will tell you that Canada was able to have harsher lockdowns than what you just described because they have more of a socialist leftist mentality, and that's more tribal, that's more authoritarian. What would you say to somebody about that who says, like, look how much worse it was in Canada, and that's because they are more of a socialist country, and socialist countries, to get more of the social benefits, you have to be in line with the state. What would be your pushback or argument to that?
Well, there are many variants of socialism. There have been some countries that adopted authoritarian models of government, like in the Soviet Union, but then there are democratic socialist governments. So socialism really has to do, the goal of the socialists is to nationalize the large industry so that there's collective ownership and that the public has a say over the management and the resources go to the state instead of into one or two. If you have one or two tycoons who dominate a particular industry, they monopolize all the wealth and the power because they buy off politicians. So socialism is a way of offsetting that. Really has nothing to do with authoritarianism. It's supposed to establish a more democratic state. There have been also a lot of government that are called socialist. Arguably, the Soviet Union was a bastard socialist state that betrayed the principles of socialism and the workers of the Soviet Union and its authoritarianism. And we can have a deeper conversation about that another day. But the argument, is not based often on understanding of what socialism entailed and what the socialist theorists would advocate for.
So when it comes to Canada, it's not so much about the socialist state, it's about the authoritarian state. And what you're saying, Professor, is that authoritarian states, or I mean, when it comes to a capitalist, a free market capitalist system, for some reason, it seems like the capitalist seems to absorb and grab all the wealth and stuff. Like you said, the purpose of socialism is to make sure that the people have a lot of say in centralized industries, major industries, rather than individuals. How would that kind of how can you kind of, separate those two thoughts when it comes to Canada? Because people do point to the fact that if you wanted to get your paycheck, your state paycheck, or your money or anything, you had to take your shot. You had to show your shot. How do you separate those two?
But that was a particular policy of the Trudeau government. That was not in line with Canadian traditions. I mean, Canada has a very good tradition as far as liberty, in many ways more so than the United States. There wasn't the same level of repression that leftist groups experienced in the United States that resulted in a more leftward orientation of its government in the post-World War II era, and the development of new party, a left-wing party, the New Democratic Party, which basically was a socialist party, at least in its formation. And one of its founders, Tommy Douglas, developed the free healthcare system in Canada. I think that the formation in the United States never developed a real left-wing party or a socialist party because of the authoritarianism, because you had concentrated wealth who enacted repressive policies. When the left became stronger, like during the first Red Scare, they arrested all the leftists and put them in jail and destroyed their organizations. That didn't happen in Canada. There was more freedom there. So they developed a genuinely progressive party. But it's just in recent years that party has drifted from its founding values to support all these foreign wars. So I think it's more a particular feature of the bad people who've run the country in the last 20 years or been part of the more left-wing movements. It has nothing to do with socialist philosophy. And in fact, capitalism often produces repression because capitalism leads to excessive inequality and concentration of wealth among the few. And the only way they can retain their privilege and power and wealth is by using repressive measures. And American history is replete with examples of that, including the crushing of the labor and left movements in the late 19th, early 20th century.
Well, I would also argue too, Professor, that it's not socialism or capitalism that kind of puts us in these predicaments. It is a ruling class that could control and manipulate any system out there to get what they want. I mean, just look at Operation Warp Speed. You can say what you want about the Democrats and the vaccines. Donald Trump teed it up for them. He teed up that golf ball right there, pretty nice and big. It didn't even look like a golf ball. It looked like one of those kickballs. So easy and big to hit for the Democrats to take Operation Warp Speed and that vaccine and run with it. It was still the pharmaceutical companies that were still calling the shots that got the money. And we had one of the biggest transfers of wealth upwards to the small 1% and created new billionaires because of Donald Trump's policies. So what would it look like moving forward for Justin Trudeau in 2025 for his election? I mean, we're going to see another Macron situation. I mean, how can we miss you, Emmanuel Macron, if you won't go away? Justin Trudeau seems to be the same type of, creature that's going to be hanging around. We got a little bit over 2 minutes, Professor.
Well, I think he's in serious trouble in the election, according to all the polls, that he's lost his, governing legitimacy because of some of these bad policies that we've been describing. And it's very likely that the Conservatives will make a comeback and win the election under Pierre Poilievre, because the NDP is a very limited party and has kind of acquiesced to this pro-war neoliberal economic agenda. So that creates an opening for the Conservatives that they'll likely seize on in the next election.
It's going to be interesting. Well, I'm here with Professor Jayme Kuzmarov. I am Craig Pasta-Jardula. This is LOL, and you're listening to, we're talking about Justin Trudeau, ladies and gentlemen, and his upcoming election in 2025, and some of the policies that he enacted. Now, you did say that his father had a relationship with I love talking about this, with Fidel Castro. Do you think that Justin Trudeau is the illegitimate son of Fidel Castro? I've heard that and talked about there. A lot of people get mad about that. We got about a minute left, and give us your final thoughts, Professor.
I don't think that's the case. I've never
they look a little bit alike, though.
Yeah, well, he's adopted the polar opposite. Yeah, and his foreign policy is very different from his father. His father was a much more honorable leader, and that's the decline we've seen in American liberalism. We discussed North American liberalism. We discussed on this show how there were a lot of honorable figures in the American Democratic Party, like Jordan McGovern and Frank Church, but there are none left today. And the same is true in Canada. Canada's had some great liberal figures: Tommy Douglas and NDP, Pierre Elliott Trudeau. And look at the garbage we have today.
Well, that's it for today, Professor. You mentioned garbage, not me. I am your host, Craig Pasta-Jardula. This was LOL. That with the kind and smart words from the Professor, Jayme Kuzmarov himself. Thank you for listening. This is WBAI in New York, and we'll see you soon out there. Professor, that's it. We're done for the day.
Great.
All right. Go get your
I'm
phone
going
call
out. You're in Florida, right? Because I'm actually going to LA on Wednesday.
I'm in LA.
Oh, you're in LA. Because
Wednesday?
Yeah, I'm traveling on Wednesday through Sunday.
What are you doing?
Well, because I was invited to be on the Discovery Channel
Really?
on Thursday. I'm going to be interviewed because they're doing a show on the assassination of Hale Boggs, who's a Louisiana.
Well, I did not cut that off. That's where Pasta cut off the video. I thought he was going to wrap up that little discussion there. I was interested in hearing what Jeremy was going to be up to. But speaking of Jeremy, I wanted to share this because we don't push this enough to help out Jeremy. But he did write this book called Warmonger. And here's where you can find it on Clarity Press Inc. And you can go there and buy Jeremy's book and read about how the Clintons malign foreign policy launched the U.S. trajectory from Bush II to Biden. And it's an interesting read. I suggest you guys go check it out and help support Jeremy. So there you go. You can also get it on Amazon, but I think, you might want to go, if you don't want to use Amazon, you go to Clarity Press. I recommend that much more than supporting the evil empire. All right. Let's take that down. Let's before we go on, let's do one more reminder here. Shonda Master, if you've got the possibility to help out, please go to her GoFundMe campaign, and you can see it right here on the screen. In fact, I'll throw the links into the chats right after the next interview starts. But go there and help her out if you can. Keep her in your hearts and minds, and we're rooting for you, Shonda. So let's get on to the next interview. We got one more. This is going to be with Sam Husseini. This one right before I started the show, so it's very, very new, very, very up to date, and it's going to take me a second here to do a little producing. Share. Okay, there we go. We got it ready. So this is Pasta with Sam Husseini, and I'm your host, CheeseSlice, by the way. But we're going to go back to Pasta with Sam Husseini, and this will be the last interview for today, and then I'll come on and wrap things up. So here we go.
Welcome back to the show, ladies and gentlemen. I am your host, Craig Pasta Jordula. This is Pasta to Go, along with the Homeless Left, the Homeless to Go show. We've been having a lot of great conversation, a lot of great guests, trying to get those nuanced answers, not just live on the surface, not let the ruling class divide us. So let's hit up the Pasta signal, like the bat signal. Bam! We're looking for somebody out there to come on the show and talk some real serious nuance with us, give us some real answers out there, not no propaganda. So our next guest will do exactly just that. You might have seen him at the White House, foreign policy apparatus, I believe, with the State Department, is where you'll catch this guy fighting back and forth with either Matt Millen or Jake Sullivan. Ladies and gentlemen, our good friend Sam Husseini is back on the show. Did I get it right, buddy?
But basically, it's a State Department. It's Miller or Patel, his understudy, and I, tried a couple of times with Blinken. But yeah, great to be with you, Pasta.
It must have been hard with Blinken. Who's the best sidestepper that you've ever dealt with? You were there when Jen Psaki was there, weren't you, or no? Did you go there after? What's his name? Oh God, it's funny how their names just go away because they're interchangeable, Sam. These people are the same talking heads. Yeah, it doesn't make a difference who their name. There's no name. There's no soul. It's just a talking piece that's going to just repeat the established foreign policy talking points. That's why you forget their names. They're interchangeable.
Yeah, true.
All right, so man, there's so many things I want to talk about with you today. Let's first off, before we get to your article on Substack and talk about colonization, it is Indigenous Peoples Day, and I think it's important to talk about that, especially in context of what's going on in Israel, Gaza nowadays. Oh my Lord! But let's talk about. I'm going to pull up really quickly your Twitter because there is something that's very interesting that I talked about with my last guest, and I would like you to kind of piggyback on this whole situation. Now, we saw with antiwar.com, correct, that it looks as if that the United States is now picking up the mantle or picking up the gun of sorts and running and defending all out fighting. We're sending troops now to the Middle East. We're using our air defense systems to shoot down missiles, or I should say rockets that came in from Iran. You shared a post with Mohammed Morandi talking about this. What does this mean? Provide some context for what this means that now that the United States is just stepping into this whole kind of role. Because I didn't mention beforehand that with the election coming up, my gut feeling tells me that they're going to give us Donald Trump. I've been really a lot more talking back against Donald Trump lately because I feel he's the greatest threat right now, and they're going to put him in charge. And it looks like he is as anti-Iranian as can be, as pro-Israel as can be. $100 million from Miriam Adelson. What does it mean that we see United States troops, U.S. troops going over there, and us picking up the mantle and fighting for Israel?
Yeah, I mean, Trump, they're both hideous. And there are a couple of things to pick apart there in what you said. The the way that the U.S. has approached this is to fundamentally, on Indigenous Peoples Day, be treating Israel as a mechanism for continued imperialism. And I think that that's where it's headed. And I think that a lot of people who I'm allied with are they still puzzle over why is the United States putting so much of its back into this? I mean, it's a piddly little area. And then some people try to, connect it to the broader Middle East, and going after all of these other countries, and that's certainly related. But I think it's even more than that. The founder of Blackwater a couple of months ago made a fascinating statement in defense of colonialism. He basically said, we need a new resurgent colonialism. And the interviewer was like, gosh, I can already hear people, getting upset about that. And, like giving him a chance to back off from it. And he was like, hell no, I'm doubling down. We need a new resurgent colonialism. And I think that that's a large part of the reason that Israel gets so much support from the United States, from across the U.S. establishment spectrum, and from Europe as well. And in that it, when World War II ended and the United Nations was established, that was supposed to be the end of colonialism. And you're supposed to have this process of decolonization. Well, it sort of happened, but it didn't really happen. And there was this one huge exception where they found a new pretext for colonialism. And that's Israel. And that's what we got. And I think that that's a large part of the reason as to why this is continuing. And I think in the United States, we have different flavors of colonialism. Like Trump, is foaming at the mouth against Iran, as you just said, and he's generally got an anti-Muslim thing and maybe an anti-Latino thing, whereas the Democrats are more anti-Russian. It's like they've divided up the pie as to who should be xenophobic towards what civilizational rival, and they all hate China, right? So that it seems to me is how the U.S. political system is weaponized against the rest of the world, or a large chunk of that.
So is this more about, when you look at your article in Substack and you talk about colonialism was supposed to end after World War II, but it didn't? Are you talking that what we're seeing right now is more about just keeping empires? Because I believe I personally believe that empires is the root to all evilness, that everything evil stems from empires, right? It starts over there, wanting an empire, and everything that trickles down below, whether it be colonialism, resource extraction, forced monetary loans to enslave a society, it all stems from empire. Are you suggesting that we support Israel's empire as a way of cloaking the fact that we want to further expand our empire and colonize areas, mainly to maybe for resource extraction or just global dominance?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think Israel qualifies as an empire yet. I think that the support that Israel gets from the U.S. and the European states, I mean, a lot of liberals will say, why are we supporting this, Israel, if it's, once they come to the realization that Israel is a settler colonial state. Some people, progressives, will say, why are we supporting a settler colonial state? And I'm like, the U.S. and Europe are supporting it exactly because it is a settler colonial state, because that's fundamentally what they are, and they have not given up on the concept. It's merely hibernating. The notion of imperialism didn't end per se. It merely, the white man's burden had to be put aside, and the Christianization of the planet had to be put aside. But here you weaponize Zionism for this purpose of continuing the colonial project at a more modest scale in its virulent form, but it can be broadened from that. And I think that it might, I think it portends, great danger in the future for what, and you had NATO. Like, you got to remember, NATO over the last 15 years has projected power into Asia, Afghanistan, into Europe itself, Yugoslavia, and into Africa with Libya. So they have this mechanism, NATO, which stands at the ready to have a resurgent imperialism. And I think that is the wider threat. And I think part of the reason that you see a lot of support for Palestine from around the world, including the global South, is because people sense that danger.
I know that Israel's not an empire yet. It seems like they want one. You look at the Great Israel Project. Yeah, it's like they want their own empire. They're not there yet.
You're totally right.
And it seems like, for whatever reason, we've obviously chosen to back Israel, aircraft carrier style, right? There are aircraft carrier in the Middle East. I know you're not a military expert, but you got your finger to the pulse of the people and the region and what's going on. You can see that by the way you ask questions in the State Department. It seems what we witnessed a couple weeks ago with Iran striking back, using rockets, getting through, penetrating into, greater Israel, military bases and whatnot. Do you think the region has changed? And I understand that, like, you're not a military expert, but I think we see the will of the people who are against the Zionist state willing to stand up and fight and do whatever is necessary. I think that, the attempts to classify Hamas as just terrorists rather than a resistance, freedom fighters, kind of fell on its face. I'm not saying that everybody's out there wearing Hamas t-shirts and rooting on Hamas. I'm sure there's a lot of people who have issues with Hamas, but I think they're looked upon as the resistance of sorts. That's what this was about last October 7th, not, a terrorist group striking. I mean, all of this started in the 1940s, for crying out loud. And before that, if you go back to Theodore Herzl and all that craziness, do you think that the will of the people in the Middle East, when you hear people like Scott Ritter or Colonel Douglas McGregor saying, you can't just wipe out the enemy the way you did before. This is, it's a different region. Do you think that the people of that region will resist a greater conflict if this continues to expand the way it has been expanding?
I think that the people of the region are certainly incredibly supportive of the Palestinians, and a lot of them are probably very sympathetic to Hamas and using armed resistance against Israel. But none of these countries are democracies, pretty much. So we're talking Egypt, Jordan, whatever. They keep their people under wraps, and they're effectively colluding with Saudi Arabia. They're colluding with Israel at one level or another. I'm torn about Iran's stance for a couple of reasons. They struck at Israel after Nasrallah. I mean, they struck earlier, but they struck more forcefully after Nasrallah was killed, not after Haniyeh was killed. I don't know if that's going to feed into sense of sectarianism, which I think is, very detrimental to the region.
That's
And
interesting. You're saying that there was some type of, had they struck back after Hassan,
after
not
Hania,
Hassan as well, excuse me, Ismail,
yeah,
right? In Iran, they should have responded after that, not just wait till it looks different now that they're,
yeah.
it looks like they're just supporting a proxy of Hezbollah. It's not their own country. You're saying that's going to have an effect on
I
the.
think it would have been stronger if they did it immediately after Hania's assassination in Iran, in part because he was the head of Hamas. The Israelis literally killed the guy they were negotiating with, or supposed to be negotiating with. I mean, it was all, a load of crap. The so-called negotiations, it was just their way of avoiding international law being finally implemented. So, and also, I mean, ultimately, people don't want to. I'm not a military man, but I listen to Scott Ritter and I listen to, so-called realists like Mersheimer. I don't know. I think that they're sort of overly optimistic, or they underestimate. I mean, Israel's got nukes. Mersheimer dismisses that, like that you can't use nukes. I'm like, who says you can't use nukes? He makes these arguments that Israel doesn't have escalatory dominance. I think Israel does have escalatory dominance. So I'm more queasy about the possibilities of a military solution here, not just for reasons of principle, but for practical reasons, given the massive U.S. backing of it, and so on. And because I remember Saddam Hussein lobbing what they called Scud missiles at Israel, and people in Jordan being happy about that, but didn't lead to anything. This seems to be a more serious threat to Israel, but I don't know. Maybe the reason that I'm not a military analyst is because I don't see a military solution here.
I think you've hit it. There is that argument that where people, I think it's Mark Sloboda I talked to about, like, well, Iran doesn't have nukes, Israel has nukes. That's a whole big advantage over there. And there are some people who don't kind of play that game. I think they think that Iran, just like Hamas, has underground bunkers, and that's going to keep them free and clear of nukes. But who knows?
Maybe.
Who knows what's going on? Maybe. But I think the key part of this is where the world powers play. In other words, when it comes to Iran, what relationship will they have with Putin and Xi in China? Will China and Russia back up Iran if the United States starts attacking them? They did it in the past, right? Obviously, it's a different relationship now. Iran is very much tied into the Belt and Road Initiative. A lot of ports are slated to be and go through Iran. When you see Vladimir Putin tell Netanyahu, get your troops out of southern Lebanon, is that a signal to say or to make you think that we better be cautious if we get involved heavily with Iran, because Russia might be right behind them saying, no, not this time, especially China. China is very much economically tied to Iran. What are your thoughts when it comes to the superpowers and then possibly backing Iran? And will that lead us into an all-out World War III?
Again, I'm a bit of a downer here for some of my friends. I mean, Russia's backed up Syria, but here we are. Israel's bombing Syria whenever the hell it wants. Nothing happens. I mean, the U.S., I think intentionally. I think that there's been a grand plan from the U.S. and Israel, and putting China and Russia on the defensive vis-a-vis Ukraine and Taiwan are part of it, so that they, have a stick to poke them with on their core interests, so that they can have less sway over what to them is a periphery of the Middle East. So I view the U.S. as not a bungling giant. I view it as an insidious Machiavellian, brutal force that is incredibly manipulative and leverages its power against all the other sort of rivals, or tries to buy them off in some way, so that it gets its core interest, which right now revolves around the Middle East.
It's crazy because you describe a foreign policy or an intelligence apparatus or whoever's calling the shot as being very smart, but yet American citizens, they're so stupid. My gut tells me that they're going to put Donald Trump back in office because it seems like they want to expand this war of sorts in the Middle East. And Donald Trump is just the type of guy, I think, for that. I mean, he like 100 million from Marion Adelson. How do we convince our citizens, especially when they just play team sports? In other words, they're with Donald Trump because he's the most anti-woke candidate out there. Also, he's going to close the border, right? And because immigrants are the number one problem for some reason now to American citizens and stuff. How do we get people to wake up to understand that the foreign policy apparatus that is in control of what we do outside this country is still driving the bus, and Donald Trump is just playing a part? I mean, how do we convince them that going to a war with Iran is bad, especially when the president is going around saying that Iran tried to kill him?
Right. I mean, he's not the only one saying it. You got Blinken saying it. So the
Wow.
whole establishment is singing this song, and trying to find a pretext to put a target on Iran's back. I don't know if they mean it or if they're just trying to threaten Iran into not backing the Palestinians and Hezbollah and Yemen as much as they are. I mean, my solution to this has been my Vote Pact project, which people can check out at votepact.org. Because what I'm saying is that people can pair up. Instead of one voting, self-loathingly for Harris and one voting self-loathingly for Trump, they can pair up and vote for non-genocidal candidates, because that's what you have right now. You have two genocidal candidates dominating the discussion with the establishment media and the propaganda and so on and so forth. Now, I'm sure a lot of your listeners are probably already planning on either not voting or voting for
third party.
Sorry?
Most of the people watching this show is third party. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I think for some reason, Jill Stein would probably be the choice. There'll be a few
Right.
Cornel West. I'm voting maybe for Chase Oliver. I don't know who's the Libertarian candidate. So yeah.
Right. I haven't made up my mind as to who I'm going to vote for, but it's going to be a non-genocidal candidate. Thank you very much.
Yes.
And I've never voted for an establishment candidate in the presidency. I voted either Green or Nader my entire life. But they know a lot of people, and they can match people up, and they can pair people up, especially people who come to them and try to bring them to their senses. Why are you voting for a third party candidate? They don't have a chance of winning. You're just helping Trump by voting for Stein. And you can say, well, why are you voting for a genocidal candidate? Because Trump is worse. Well, why don't you pair up with somebody else who's on the other side? And here, let's try to find a friend for you who you can pair up with. And that has the potential to spread organically, and to get more and more people. Because, I mean, realistically, if you look at the issues, what we have now is a severe undercount of third-party support, right? I mean, the Stein and Oliver have far more support in terms of issues in the general public than 1 or 2% that they're likely to get. If what we're looking at. So, I mean, part of that is the whole media bias and all the baloney and all the political rhetoric. But part of it is people have not organized themselves in a way to stand up against it. So what I'd love to see is people pairing up more and more people so that one votes for Stein and one votes for Oliver, or however, people want to do it, so that they really stand up to the establishment. And it becomes a love over hate kind of thing, a personal bond that you have with, a friend, a relative, a drinking buddy, whatever. overcoming this media mantra that tells you that you got to hate the other side, and MSNBC and Fox News telling you got to hate the other side, and you got to get behind Trump or you got to get behind Harris, and all of this bullshit. So I hope I can say that.
I wanted to say really quickly, vote pack is one of these situations when you pair up people who would normally vote for a Trump and a Kamala, and you say, hey, let's go cancel out each other's support and vote for the third party, right? And this is the other side of the coin. I'm an election integrity activist. I want to fix the process in which we do elections, but that's only one part, because the media manipulation and the propaganda that's going to force you into the two-party duopoly, we need another way to combat that. And that's what I think that's great about Vote Pack, because this is like the both sides of the coin. Because people tell me all the time, Pasta, even if you did fix the election system and we had a transparent system like you witnessed in Nicaragua, and we had a system that was fair, I still think one of the two-party members would win because of the media control and what we're told. Can you just give put a little cherry on top of what I just said about Vote Pack, because it's so important to explain it?
Sure. I mean, the media manipulation is massive. You have the entire media structure of MSNBC and CNN on one side and Fox on the other, basically, drumming that into people's heads. Right-wing talk radio on one side, Musk on Twitter on one side and Zuckerberg on Facebook on the other side. The whole structure is built around this. And it even goes into the polls, because the polling, the polls almost never ask the American public who they want to be president. Every poll puts them in the same box. They say, if the election were held today, which of the following would you vote for? And half the time they don't even mention the third parties or independents.
Yeah.
They only mention Trump and Harris. But just that phraseology, if the election were held today, they don't say, who do you want to be president? Because then people might say, okay, I want Joe Stein to be president, but I'm going to vote for Harris because I don't want Trump. But the media and the pollsters that are associated with them don't try to get there. And I put forward a series of other questions that should be asked. The obvious one is, who do you want to be president? But I come up with a better one. There's a four-way tie between Harris, Trump, Oliver, and Stein. You are the tiebreaker. Who do you vote for? That's the way to get at actual voter preference, which the entire system doesn't want you to know. They don't want you to know that your neighbors might be thinking the same way that you're thinking.
Yeah.
And then, if that gets done and then that gets reported on, and then people see that the numbers, that they're not alone, so they'll be more likely to say a third party candidate because they don't feel like they're nuts, that they're the only one who's thinking this way. And then it can snowball in the same way that Vote Pact as a movement could snowball. So I think that there are, it's an insidious system, and we got to be creative as to how we overcome this.
I think that's great. I've always loved Vote Pact, the idea of it and talking about it, because it's so important. Because, like I said,
and I got to say, I don't know, you might not like this, because I know, you're associated with Jimmy Dore, and he was part of it, and other people. They did this unity thing, where they all, got behind Trump, and that to me is a complete perversion of unity. I mean, I viewed Vote Pact as actual anti-establishment unity, which a lot of these people are supposed to be for. And I think you had, just a complete charade around RFK Jr., where he, took all of the dissent around the pandemic, which was very righteous. I mean, I was, out there in front, about, COVID origins and all of this stuff. And he took all that energy into a pro-genocide movement, into backing Trump, who's, the president who gave us, I can't even remember now the name of the whole warp speed thing, all that. It's ridiculous. It's
Operation
ridiculous.
Warp Speed.
Yeah,
he teed up the ball for the Democrats. He made that ball like a kickball size, easy to hit with a golf club, for the Democrats to run with the vaccine and go with it. And people don't want to
Totally. And I
they
think
want to forget that when it came to Donald Trump. They also want to make him look like the anti-war candidate, Sam, as if he didn't give Kiev the weaponry that even Barack Obama didn't want to give them. I mean, it's just
you're totally hitting the nail on the head, and that's sort of the answer to your first question about what to do about Trump. And people think that Trump is, because he's anti-woke, that he's going to be quote unquote good. No, I mean, look at his first term. Yeah, he didn't start any new wars per se, but he kept them going, and I mean, he put in Bolton and Pompeo, and he set it up to where we are now.
he also
not
increased drone warfare, right? He increased drone warfare by like 300%. Civilians were more killed. He funded the Saudi government to kill Yemenis. He continued what was going on with Syria. He tried to whack Nicolas Maduro. He was successful in whacking Soleimani. I mean, he's not an anti-war candidate. And we learned from his interview with Mark Levin that he was never going to fully pull out of Afghanistan, that he was going to keep a base there. Why, Sam? He wanted to agitate the Chinese more than anything. He said that. So, I mean, he's completely not an anti-war candidate. The thing that disturbed me about Rescue the Republic was, number one, we're supposed to vote third party. We're supposed to lead people out of the two-party duopoly. It's the same thing. I can't believe those people were getting duped to think that Donald Trump is the lesser of two evils. It's the same thing. He's the establishment. Israel's still going to be driving the bus. But when it came to Israel, that event made me what I saw from them is they were trying to make Israel a third rail. Like, oh, what difference does it make? Kamala Harris is a Zionist, Sam. So is Donald Trump. But at least Donald Trump wants to end the war in Ukraine. And those two wars are very, very different. What do you think of the attempts to try and make the Israeli-Gaza situation a third rail? I mean, I think they're somewhat successful at it because American voters or American people who are getting involved don't pay attention to foreign policy so much. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, just please don't pay any attention to the genocide that's going on there. I mean, it's ridiculous. If you're not going to take a stand on that, then what are you doing? What do you really stand for? Get off it. And Trump really, I mean, Trump was brilliant in how he took dissent and flipped it around. He was a critic of NATO, and how did he use it? To get other countries in Europe to pay more money into NATO. Right, he totally flipped the dissent. He set up the current situation with the so-called Abraham Accords. Were supposed to be this great thing. What did that do? That made relations between Israel and a bunch of Arab dictatorships, so some of whom he had to pay off, so that the Palestinians would be more isolated. And I believe ended up with Hamas having this calculus that they had to do October 7th in order to prevent this isolation. I mean, I'm not a mind reader. I don't have internal documents, but I think that was part of their calculus. So no, Trump's foreign policy brought us to this horrible point, and we need a radical shift. And you mentioned immigration. I want to weigh in on that too, because so many things that the establishment loves the left and right to bicker about are what I call symptomatic issues, like immigration. What causes desperate immigration from the Mexican border? Corporate trade deals, the drug wars, and U.S. interventions in Latin America. Right. But the left and right, the principled left and right, agree with each other on those issues. They want to end those corporate trade deals that impoverish Mexican farmers and Central American farmers. They want to end the drug war. They want to stop the interventions that destabilize different countries. So if the principled left and right got together, it would solve the underlying issues so that you don't have a symptomatic issue. Like immigration that the media love to talk about because they love to trigger people on the left and right into bickering while they're, robbing the country blind.
Yeah. And the same multinational corporations that are screwing us here in America are screwing the people of Latin America, which is driving the people here anyways. They're taking their stuff out of the ground and excuse me. they're sending it here to the United States. And a lot of those immigrants are just following their stuff here, hoping to get a little trickle down when they get here with their stuff that's been extracted out of the ground. With that being said, with us talking about vote pack, with us talking about third party, more than likely, Sam, we're going to have Donald Trump or Kamala Harris. Is there any way you see? I mean, we talked to a lot of normies out there, people who might not be involved in, what our echo chamber and understand the actual roadmap of what's going on foreign policy wise and policy wise and stuff. Can you see an argument being made for Donald Trump being the lesser of two evils? Maybe when it comes to censorship, I don't know. Being pro-Israel seems to be pro-censorship too. But
I mean, whoever it is, I think people can't be sitting around waiting to give them a chance. You got to be out there pushing them from day one. I mean, I remember when Obama came in, all these people who were protesting every day because Bush was in the White House and he wasn't going to listen to them, suddenly stopped protesting because it was Obama in the White House. But you got to protest because he might actually listen to you. So take whatever good is in. I mean, if it's Trump, I mean, we should push for a good America first from Trump, maybe on censorship, like you say. If Trump believes in America first, I want him to mandate that every American corporation starts all their board meetings with the Pledge of Allegiance. All right. Let corporate America deal with that. Let's make it a real America first that actually stands up for some sense of decency and for what the First Amendment actually means, and for what the good values we can see that are in the American tradition. So I think people have just got to be out there pushing whoever it is from day one to live up to what they say are some of their best attributes, and to challenge them from day one on the horrible things that they've said and done.
Do you see the greatest responsibility of the anti-war movement moving forward with Donald Trump being Israel, Gaza, or do you think it's China? I mean, from the rhetoric you see coming out of the Trump administration or the Trump lackeys of sorts, is China the bigger threat, or is it the situation in Israel, Gaza?
Well, I mean, Israel, Gaza is obviously urgent because of the humanitarian toll. I mean, every day they're bombing another hospital and burning people alive and slaughtering people and preventing food from coming in. So it's an incredibly dire humanitarian situation. And at certain points, Trump has actually said, Bibi, you got to wrap this up. That kind of thing.
What does that mean? Is he telling him to use nukes?
He knows what it means. He's telling them to use nukes, or he's telling them to expel them into Egypt or something like that. Stop it all. There've got to be forceful protests, including by right wingers who have a decent position on this, to confront President-elect Trump on this, because Netanyahu is going to feel like he can get away with murder during a transition.
Yeah.
So people have got to be totally prepared for that.
There are some people who think that there's no way that the Palestinians can survive what's going on right now because there's no slowing down. But also the fact, if a wider conflict definitely becomes inflamed, there'll be even less attention paid to what's happening in Gaza. Do you think the people of Palestine can survive this, or do you think their only option is to become like nomads, almost like what the Israelis were one day?
Well, I mean, I don't know what you mean by one day. I mean, Jews
were, before. I mean,
yeah. I mean, I'm just
they
saying,
were once nomadic, right? I mean, Moses.
You got lots of Jews from Brooklyn who should be very happy in Brooklyn deciding to go to Israel and become settlers and steal people's houses.
That's true. That's true.
we don't need that. I mean, the Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank have proven to be incredibly resilient. You got doctors who are still trying to make hospitals functioning while they're literally getting bombed. It's an incredible testament to human bravery. I'm sorry, maybe I'm not picking up on your exact question, but
Well, the question is, can they survive? And it seems to me that there's no more talks of a ceasefire.
It's
They're
hard.
still continuing to bomb hospitals. That can they survive this? Will they be able to stay in Palestine, or will they have to flee because Jared Kushner wants to build oceanside properties in Gaza, and they also, want the natural gas that's there, and maybe the Ben Gurion River they want to build too as well. My question to you is, can the Palestinians survive in their own homeland, or are they going to have to essentially flee to survive, to exist?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that question. I think they've been incredibly resilient. Trump may attempt to pay off Sisi in Egypt to take a bunch of Palestinians and to let Netanyahu, try to drive them out. I don't know if that's going to be possible or not. I am also concerned about, when they broaden the war to Iran, that takes the eyes off of Gaza. So people have got to be able to, walk and chew gum at the same time. And I'm hoping that, process will escalate, that, directed at the U.S. government, at other governments that need to step up and implement sanctions and so on, to really put as much pressure as necessary on Israel so that this stops.
Who knows what's going to happen in the future? Who knows what's going to happen with Donald Trump if he gets reelected? Who knows what's going to happen with Kamala Harris if she gets reelected? I think we both know that it's going to be never America first. It's going to be Israel first. But we're very appreciative, Sam Husseini, that you stay based through all this and you never play team sports. Please let everybody know where they can find your work and read some more of your great stuff out there.
Thank you so much. The Vote Pact project is just at votepact.org, VOTEPACT.org. And I'm also on Substack, Husseini, HUSSEINI.substack.com. And I try to write there pretty regularly.
Sam Husseini, ladies and gentlemen, you know him, you love him. He's a regular here. We'll see you again, Sam. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you, Pasta, so much.
You have a good one, buddy.
You too.
All right. That was the last interview for today. I hope you enjoyed Sam Husseini and Pasta. Let me go ahead and show you those links that he brought up real quick. So the first one here, this is votepact.org. You can go to this website and visit it. That's what it looks like. And I'm sure he'll enjoy having more and more people sign up for it. Now, personally, for me, I don't need a voting buddy to vote against Republicans and Democrats. I've already been doing it since 2012. So that was the last time I voted for one of those two stupid parties. And remember, you can't fix the problem if you keep voting for the thing that causes the problem. But this is votepact.org. If you need help convincing somebody to break away from the two-party system, if they need that support to know that their vote is not going to be meaningless because you're voting with somebody else to vote against the two parties, I think that's the gist of this plan. And some people, I think, need that. So go to votepact.org. The other one that he mentioned is his Substack, which is this, right? This is what it looks like right here. This is Husseinisubstack.com. Let me get that link and post it here. Well, 1 second. There we go. I got it there. So you just see that on his little name tag there. He had it, but let me put it up there again. So definitely go visit his Substack. And also you can visit his Twitter here at samhusseini.com. It's really easy. It's just his name. He got lucky and was able to get it. So, but he joined in 2009, back when you could actually get your name. So good on you, Sam. All right. So that is going to be it for the show today. I've been your host today, your guest host and presenter, CheeseSlice. I'm also the engineer running things behind the scenes. So please like and share this stream, help out the show, and we will see you in the future. But that's it for today, and it's time for CheeseSlice to go. See you later, everybody. sorry, I forgot to do the stupid rate. TD tipped $10. Aluminum, barium, lithium, and strontium. Geoengineering toxins raining down on us. Thank you so much for that, TD. I know we're probably one of the most poisoned countries in the world because our regulations and our regulators have been captured by those who need to be regulated. But thank you so much, TD. And now on to the closing credits. Everybody have a good evening.